Let me read to you a passage from the 6th chapter of St. Mark's Gospel, verses 14 to 29. It's the Gospel for Friday of the 4th week in Ordinary Time, Year 1. I shall only read part of it because it's a long passage. St. Mark writes, King Herod had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. For John had been saying to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. But she was not able to, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. Finally, the opportunity came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to the girl, "Ask me for anything you want, and I'll give it to you." And he promised her with an oath, "Whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom." She went out and said to her mother, "What shall I ask for?" "The head of John the Baptist," she answered. At once the girl hurried into the king with the request, "I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in prison, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. That's from Mark chapter 6, verses 14 to 29, or most of it. And what does it suggest to us? Well, may I begin this way. One of the great modern hobbies is family history. Large numbers of people are fascinated by their ancestry. An intriguing question about all this is, just what element of their family history do they find so fascinating? After all, the overwhelming number of persons in their ancestry are ordinary and in no way distinguished. I think that in some cases at least, the most fascinating, though not the most important, element is not so much the individuals making up their ancestry, but actually the location where they lived their lives. It could be a certain part of England or a certain location in Australia which has riveted the imagination of the researcher because perhaps of its beauty, the beauty of the location, that part of the country. That location is the arena of the family saga. Without perhaps realizing it, the researcher, in his imagination, gazes constantly on the locations within which the action of the generations is played out. Well, be all that as it may or may not be, let us, in our mind's eye, gaze on the land of Palestine, the promised land to which Abraham was called and on which the chosen people of God played out its history. Let our mind's eye rove over the centuries as we gaze on that holy land, that land of so unique an interaction between God and a special people. Now, what are the fundamental issues at work in this great story, in that location? Issues that are recurring time and again, like the ebb and flow of the tide along the shore. The issues are good and evil, God and sin. There is ever a struggle in process. God is contending for man, and the sin in the heart of man, like a serpent in its lair, is at times receding and at times advancing. This people of God's predilection is set apart to bring salvation to the world. And finally, the time has come, and the precursor appears. John the Baptist. He is taken, and the mantle passes to the one to whom he pointed, the Messiah. But the struggle remains and will continue to the end of the world. It is the struggle between God and sin, and man must choose. God will be the victor. In our gospel passage today, we see these very issues being played out. Sin, like a grand serpent, raises its head and strikes. The good man is left dead, and the struggle goes on. John the Precursor has been arrested for his prophetic denunciation of Herod's marital situation. One gospel has it that Herod wanted to imprison John, while our gospel today from Mark tells us that it was mainly because of Herodias, whom Herod had married. Mark records Peter's recollection, and presumably it means that while Herod imprisoned John willingly, it was Herodias who was the primary instigator and force behind the arrest. Well, the passage directs our gaze on these personalities, and they surely represent the sin to which I have been referring. There is also the black spirit behind the drama, and that is Satan, who hates the Holy Baptist, who had been preparing the people for the far holier Messiah. The fiend has no handle on John. All he can hope to do is have him destroyed. And Satan, as Christ said of him, is a liar and a murderer from the beginning. Herod has a kind of superstitious awe of John, but he is weak and very sensual. He is proud, he is vain and childish in his boasting and bravado. He is ensnared in his desire for human respect. Christ later called him a fox and refused to speak to him during his passion. Herod provides one figure of sin, but look at the other figure as presented in our gospel passage today. I refer to Herodias. Her hatred of John was intense, it was implacable. There is no sensitivity to the holiness of John, as there was in Herod. Herod would not accede to the demands of his unlawful wife to do away with John, for John's goodness, in a sense, dominated him. Not so Herodias. Her conscience had been utterly corrupted, and God and the moral law was absent from her heart. It seems that her daughter, though less willful perhaps than her mother, had been raised in the likeness of her evil parent. So the chance came when the daughter captivated the king and his court with her dancing. She skipped out to her mother, to whom she was attached, and then skipped back with her terrible request. Her conscience too had gone, and sin reigned in her as it did in her mother. The serpent raised its head and struck, and the good man lay dead, a witness to the truth. The issues characterize the story of the chosen people of God and the story of the world. Across the centuries, God and sin are in constant conflict. The conflict reaches its crescendo with the arrival of the Precursor. The arrival of the Precursor, and when he is taken, with the arrival of the Messiah himself. Their witness to the truth unto death is the means of victory. But we too must understand the issues. The issue is, what is it to be? God or sin? Good or evil? You know, there are two standards held aloft, and behind each there is a kingdom, a household, a leader. Let us choose for Christ and follow his way, allowing no truck with sin. All for Christ then. Away with Satan, for the victory is the Lord's. Let us make this the cry of our hearts for every day.